I want to ask you something that seems almost too simple. What is seeing? Most people think they know the answer. Light bounces off objects, enters your eyes, and you see the world. Simple. And honestly, I used to think that too. For years, I accepted this grade school explanation without really thinking about it. But then I started asking the kinds of questions that make people uncomfortable at dinner parties. What is that light? Exactly. What happens when it hits your eye? And here's the one that really got me. What you're seeing right now, this image in front of you, is it actually out there? Or is it something your brain is constructing, a kind of hallucination that happens to match reality pretty well? What I discovered about vision fundamentally changed how I understand what it means to experience anything. And I want to take you on that journey with me. You know, when I was a young boy in Far Rockaway, my father had this wonderful way of teaching me things. He'd take me for walks and point at birds, at trees, at the sky. But he never just told me names. He told me to look. I remember once, I must have been about 8 or 9, I asked him, "Pop, why is the sky blue?" And he didn't give me some quick answer. He said, "Well, what do you think blue is? What's actually happening when you see that color?" And that question stuck with me. Not why is the sky blue? I'd figure out the Rayleigh scattering later, but what is blue? What is color? What is seeing itself? Let me tell you where this gets interesting. During my time at Caltech, I taught the introductory physics lectures. And every year, I'd get to the section on light and optics, and I'd watch my students nod along as if they understood. Light travels at 186,000 miles per second. It reflects and refracts. The eye focuses it onto the retina. Got it. Next topic. But they didn't get it. Not really. Because the conventional story about vision leaves out almost everything that matters. Here's what textbooks tell you: light is electromagnetic radiation. It travels in waves. Different wavelengths correspond to different colors. Red is about 700 nanometers. Violet is about 400 nanometers. The light enters your eye, passes through the lens, hits the retina, where special cells called rods and cones convert it to electrical signals, and those signals travel to your brain where somehow UFC. That word somehow is doing an awful lot of work, isn't it? I couldn't accept this answer because it skips over the most important part. It's like explaining how a television works by saying, electricity goes in somehow and pictures come out. You haven't explained anything. What troubled me wasn't the mechanics. I understood how lenses focus, how photoreceptors respond to light, how neurons transmit signals. What troubled me was this: at what point does the physical process become as experience? Where does the photon end and the seeing begin? Let me put it another way. Right now, as you watch this, photons are streaming into your eyes. Those photons are just electromagnetic disturbances, ripples in the electromagnetic field, if you like. They have no color. They have no brightness. They're just oscillations, waves. And yet somehow you experience a vivid colored, three-dimensional world. When I really started digging into this problem, I realized I'd been making a fundamental mistake. I'd been assuming that the world I see is the world that exists. That what's out there is basically what's in here, in my experience. But that's not true at all. And the physics proves it. I remember a conversation I had with Murray Gell. Man, this was sometime in the early 60s, I think. We were having lunch, arguing about something, as we often did, and I said to him, "Murray, do you think the redness of that apple over there is actually in the apple?" He gave me one of those looks he gives when he thinks you're saying something obvious. Of course not. Wavelengths aren't colors. Right, I said. But do you really feel that? Do you experience the world as if color is in your head and not in the apple? He paused. And that pause told me something important. Even brilliant physicists who know the theory don't usually feel the truth of it. So I made it my mission to really understand this. Not just intellectually, but deeply. What is actually happening when I open my eyes and see the world? And what I found shattered my intuitive sense of reality. Let me start with light itself, because that's where most people's understanding breaks down. When I was developing quantum electrodynamics, QED as we call it, I spent years thinking about what light actually is. And I can tell you, it's much stranger than you imagine. You've probably heard that light is both a wave and a particle. That's the kind of thing teachers say, and it's sort of true, but it doesn't capture the weirdness. Light is neither a wave nor a particle in any way you can picture. It's something else entirely. Something that sometimes behaves like a wave when you set up one kind of experiment, and sometimes behaves like a particle when you set up another. The photon, the quantum of light, doesn't fit into any category that makes sense to our monkey brains evolved on the African savanna. But here's what's important for understanding vision when light interacts with matter. When it's absorbed by your retina, for instance, it acts like a particle. A single photon gets absorbed by a single molecule, and this is remarkable. Your eye is a quantum detector. I remember the moment I really understood this. I was reading some papers on the sensitivity of rod cells. These are the light-detecting cells in your retina that work in dim light, and I found that a single rod cell can respond to a single photon, one quantum of light. Think about that. A photon is the smallest possible amount of light that can exist. It's an indivisible unit. And your eye, this biological organ that evolved over millions of years, can detect one single unit. In my QD diagrams, I draw photons as little wavy lines. And one of those little lines, that's all it takes to trigger a chemical cascade in your retina. Now, you don't consciously see single photons because your brain requires several photons hitting nearby rods in a short time window before it registers an event. This makes sense, it filters out noise, but the underlying detection mechanism is operating at the quantum limit. This is where I started to see the pattern. Vision isn't just physics turning into experience. It's quantum physics turning into experience. And that raises all sorts of questions I wasn't prepared for. Let me take you through what happens, step by step, because the sequence of events is astonishing when you really pay attention. A photon is emitted, let's say from the sun. It travels 93 million miles through space in about 8 minutes. It enters Earth's atmosphere, maybe scatters off a few molecules. That's your blue sky, and eventually bounces off some object. An apple, let's say, a red apple. Now, the apple's surface absorbs most wavelengths of visible light, but it reflects the longer wavelengths, around 700 nanometers. So photons of that wavelength bounce off and travel toward your eye. The photon passes through your cornea, through the aqueous humor, through the pupil, through the lens, through the vitreous humor, and finally reaches your retina at the back of your eye. There, it encounters a cone cell, specifically an L cone, which is sensitive to longer wavelengths. Inside that cone cell, there's a molecule called retinal attached to a protein called opsin. The photon is absorbed by the retinal molecule, and this absorption causes the molecule to change shape. It twists. One single photon causes one single molecule to twist from one configuration to another. This conformational change triggers a cascade of chemical reactions inside the cell, amplifying the signal by about 1,000,000 times. Eventually, the cell changes its electrical state, sending a signal down the optic nerve toward your brain. And here's where the mystery deepens. That electrical signal, it's just changes in voltage and ion concentrations. There's nothing red about it. There's nothing bright or dim about it. It's just electrochemistry. So where does the redness come from? Where does the Oz brightness come from? Where does the A image come from? I remember when Bohr visited Caltech once, and I asked him about this. I said, "Niels, at what point in this chain of physical events does seeing happen?" He smiled at me. He had this wonderful way of smiling when you asked a question he liked, and said, "Richard, You are asking where the subject begins and the object ends. But quantum mechanics has already taught us that this boundary is not where we think it is. I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time, but I kept thinking about it. But wait, I realized something even stranger. The more I thought about color, the more I realized that what we call color doesn't correspond to physics in any straightforward way. Let me show you what I mean. You look at a rainbow, and you see what looks like a continuous spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. These correspond to wavelengths from about 700 nanometers down to about 400 nanometers. Fair enough. But what about purple, magenta? These colors aren't in the rainbow. There's no wavelength of light that is purple. Purple is what happens when you mix red light and blue light together. Your eye receives photons from both ends of the spectrum simultaneously, and your brain somehow creates an entirely new experience that isn't in the rainbow at all. It invents a color. This bothered me enormously when I first understood it. What it means is that color isn't simply a label we put on wavelengths. Color is something the brain constructs, and the construction is based on a very peculiar system. See, you have three types of cone cells. The L cones respond mostly to long wavelengths, the M cones to medium wavelengths, and the S cones to short wavelengths. Every color you've ever experienced is just some combination of activity in these three types of cells. Your entire chromatic universe, every sunset, every painting, every flower is encoded in three channels. This is why a television screen works. It only emits three colors: red, green, and blue, but by mixing them in different proportions, it can create the sensation of any color. Not the actual wavelength, mind you. Just the sensation. I did a thought experiment that really drove this home for me. Imagine an alien species with 4 types of color receptors instead of 3. Or 10 types. They would experience colors we cannot imagine. Not just colors we've never seen, colors we are incapable of seeing. Our brains literally cannot construct those experiences. The visible spectrum isn't some natural boundary in physics. It's just the range where our particular photoreceptors happen to work. Below 400 nanometers is ultraviolet. Bees can see it. We can't. Above 700 nanometers is infrared. Some snakes can see it. We can't. We're blind to most of the electromagnetic spectrum. But here's the deeper point. I thought about this for months. If color is something the brain constructs from 3 channels of input, and if different creatures with different receptors would experience completely different color spaces, then color isn't out there in the world at all. Color is in here, in the brain, in the mind. The apple isn't red. The apple reflects certain wavelengths. You are red. The redness is in your experience. Now, you might say, well, fine, but the apple is still really there, right? The shape, the location, the solidness of it, that's real, and this is where things get really uncomfortable. Let me tell you what happened next. I started investigating how the brain actually constructs the visual image, and I discovered that as everything you see is a construction, not just color. Consider this: there's a spot on your retina where the optic nerve exits the eye. It's called the optic disc. There are no photoreceptors there. It's completely blind. Each of your eyes has a hole in its vision about the size of a lemon held at arm's length. But you don't see a hole. You don't see 2 black spots in your visual field. Your brain fills in the missing information, inventing details to create a seamless image. Inventing them. Your brain is constantly inventing parts of what you think you're seeing. And it gets worse. Your retina has high resolution only in a tiny central region called the fovea. Everywhere else, your vision is blurry and poorly colored. But you don't experience it that way. You feel like you're seeing a uniformly detailed world. That's because your eyes are constantly making rapid movements called saccades, about 3 or 4 per second, scanning the scene and building up a mental model. Your brain stitches together these glimpses into a stable, detailed panoramic image that doesn't actually exist anywhere in your eye at any single moment. I asked myself, if this is true, then what about the rest of what I see? What about depth, motion, shape? How much of my visual experience is direct perception and how much is construction? The answer, I found, is that almost all of it is construction. This is where my understanding completely shifted. I had been thinking about vision as a process of recording, as if the eye were a camera and the brain were film. Light comes in, image gets captured, you see the image, passive, receptive. But that's completely wrong. Vision is a process of interpretation. More than that, it's a process of prediction. Your brain isn't just receiving data. It's actively constructing a hypothesis about what's out there and using the incoming light to check and refine that hypothesis. Let me give you an example that really opened my eyes, pardon the pun. Look at a shadow sometime. Really look at it. The shadow appears darker than the illuminated area nearby, obviously. But here's the thing. Measure the actual light intensity in different parts of a scene, and you'll find that shadows in bright sunlight often reflect a more light than white objects in shade. Your brain doesn't show you the light intensities. That would be useless. Instead, it calculates what the actual color of the surface probably is, taking into account the illumination conditions. It computes surface reflectance, not raw luminance. And it does this so automatically, so effortlessly, that you have no idea it's happening. This is called color constancy, and it's absolutely astonishing when you realize what it implies. Your brain is solving an incredibly complicated inverse problem, figuring out the properties of objects from the light reaching your eye, and it's doing this in milliseconds, without any conscious effort on your part. Now, here's what I noticed that really got me thinking. The visual system doesn't just process what's there. It anticipates what should be there. And when the anticipation is wrong, strange things happen. Have you ever noticed that it's very hard to see your own eyes move? Stand in front of a mirror and look at your left eye, then your right eye. You'll see your eyes in different positions, but you won't see the movement. It's invisible to you, even though someone standing next to you would see the movement clearly. Your brain is suppressing the visual information during the eye movement because that information would be useless, just a blur, and confusing. It literally edits your experience to remove the parts that don't make sense in its model. I tell my students to think of it like this. You are not watching a movie of the world. You are dreaming a world that happens to be constrained by some sensory data coming in from outside. That's a disturbing thought, isn't it? Let me push it even further. Everything I've described, the color construction, the filling in, the prediction, the editing, all of this is happening in neural tissue. The visual cortex at the back of your head is doing billions of calculations every second. And the result of those calculations is your experience of seeing. But here's the question I couldn't stop asking. How does neural activity become experience? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. And I have to be honest with you, I don't have an answer. Nobody does. I can tell you exactly what happens to a photon from the moment it leaves the sun until it gets absorbed by your retina. I can describe the biochemistry of photoreception, the neurophysiology of the visual pathway, the computational architecture of the visual cortex. But I cannot tell you why any of this is accompanied by experience. Why there's something it's like to see red rather than just information processing with nobody home. This bothered me. It still bothers me. Because physics is supposed to explain how the world works, and this is something physics doesn't seem to touch. During my time working on quantum electrodynamics, I got very comfortable with the idea that we don't always understand why the equations work, just that they work. The mathematics gives you the right answers, and you learn to accept that you can't always reduce it to intuitive pictures. Maybe consciousness is like that. Maybe we just have to accept that certain configurations of matter, brains at least, have experiences, and there's no further explanation available. But I'm not satisfied with that, and I don't think you should be either. Now, here's what changed everything for me. I started thinking about what vision tells us about the nature of reality itself. You see, the naive view is that there's a world out there and we have direct access to it through our senses. The apple is red and round and solid, and we perceive those properties because they're real properties of the apple. But everything I've shown you suggests that this is wrong. Color is a construction. Shape is inferred from ambiguous data. Even the apparent stability and continuity of the visual world is manufactured by the brain. So what is real? Let me approach this as a physicist. What does physics say is out there? If I describe the world using quantum field theory, which is our best current description, I find that out there is a collection of quantum fields. The electromagnetic field, the electron field, the quark fields, and so on. Particles are excitations in these fields. What you call an apple is a particular configuration of field excitations that stays more or less stable over time. There's nothing red about those fields. There's nothing apple-shaped in any meaningful sense. Those fields don't have any properties that resemble what you experience when you see an apple. The redness, the shape, the solidity, all of that is generated by your brain as a way of representing the information it receives from the field configurations. But the representation is not the thing itself. It's like a map and a territory. The map is useful for navigating, but it isn't the territory. And I realized that what we call perception is like a map, a highly stylized, compressed, and in some ways fictional representation that helps us interact with the world without actually showing us what the world is. This is where my intuition failed me completely. I had always assumed, without really thinking about it, that my visual experience was showing me reality. Maybe not perfectly, but at least approximately. A rough picture of what's actually there. But now I understood that the relationship between experience and reality is much stranger than that. The visual world I experience is a kind of interface, like the icons on a computer screen. The icons are useful for interacting with the computer, but they don't show you what's actually happening inside the machine. The file folder icon doesn't look like the magnetic patterns on the hard drive because that would be useless. The icon is a fiction that helps you work. Your visual experience is like those icons. The apple icon is useful for eating, but it doesn't show you the quantum fields because that would be useless. Natural selection built us to survive and reproduce, not to perceive truth. Let me tell you what finally crystallized my understanding. I was sitting on my back porch in Pasadena one evening watching the sunset. Beautiful colors, oranges, pinks, purples. And I thought, none of this is real, not in the sense that it's a hallucination. In the sense that the colors I'm seeing are my brain's way of representing electromagnetic radiation, and the shape of the sun is my brain's way of representing a sphere of plasma 93 million miles away, and the three-dimensional space I seem to be looking into is my brain's way of representing something I don't even have a good word for. The sunset is a user interface, and so is everything else I've ever seen. Everything I thought I knew was about to change. And then it hit me. The question, what is vision, doesn't just have a surprising answer about physics and biology. It has a surprising answer about the nature of reality and our place in it. Here's what I understood. We are not observers of the universe. We are not watching a movie of reality. We are participants in a process of reality construction. Every moment of your waking life, your brain is taking incomplete, noisy, ambiguous signals from your senses and weaving them into a coherent world. And this world, the only world you have ever known, is not out there. It's in here, in your head, in your mind. This doesn't mean reality doesn't exist. There's clearly something out there causing the signals that reach your senses. The universe pushes back when you push against it. You can't walk through walls. There's structure and regularity that our models have to respect. But the reality you experience, with its colors and sounds and smells and tastes and textures, that reality is a construction. A dream sculpted by sensory data. Let me try to express this more precisely, because I know it sounds almost mystical, and I'm not a mystical person. I'm a physicist. What physics describes is a world of particles and fields, of equations and symmetries. This world has no colors, no sounds, no smells. It has wavelengths and frequencies and molecular shapes, but these are not the same as experiences. The experience of red is not a wavelength. The experience of middle C is not 262S. The experience of the smell of coffee is not a molecular shape. These experiences are correlated with the physical properties. They're useful representations, but they are not identical to them. So what you see is a kind of translation. Physics gets translated into experience. And in that translation, something entirely new is created. A subjective world, a world of qualities, a world of what it's like. I think this is the most remarkable thing about vision, and about consciousness in general. Somewhere in that 3 pounds of neural tissue behind your eyes, the physical world gets transformed into the experiential world. Matter becomes mind. Quantity becomes quality. And I don't know how. That's an unusual thing for me to admit. I've spent my career understanding how things work, and this is something I don't understand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the fact that it happens, that matter can give rise to experience. This seems to me to be the deepest fact about reality, more fundamental than the laws of physics. Because without experience, without someone home to notice anything, what would any of it mean? This changed how I see reality. I used to look at the world and think I was seeing it. Now I look at the world and know I'm seeing a representation, a beautiful, useful, utterly convincing representation that my brain has constructed from hints and guesses. And here's the strange thing, this makes the world all more wonderful to me, not less. Think about what you're doing right now. Photons that left my image on a screen are traveling across space, entering your eyes, being absorbed by molecules in your retina, triggering electrical signals that propagate through your brain, and somehow, you're experiencing this. You're having a subjective experience of my voice, my ideas, my words. How is that possible? I don't know. And that's okay. The pleasure isn't in having all the answers. It's in asking the questions. I hope you can see what I see now, not just the details about photons and neurons, but the deeper picture that reality is far stranger than it appears, that your visual experience is a controlled hallucination, that the world you live in is built by your brain from scraps of information and educated guesses. And yet, and here's what I find most beautiful, it works. It works well enough that you can navigate the world, form relationships, create art, do science, fall in love. The interface is good enough to let us be human. I tell my students nature uses only the longest threads to weave her patterns. So each small piece of her fabric reveals the organization of the entire tapestry. Vision is one of those threads. Pull on it, and you start to see how everything is connected, physics and biology, and neuroscience and philosophy, and consciousness itself. This is the beauty of physics, and I wanted you to experience it with me. The next time you open your eyes in the morning and see the world laid out before you, the light, the colors, the shapes, remember you're not just seeing, you're creating. Your brain is taking the raw data of existence and transforming it into the magical experience of being alive. Isn't that the most beautiful thing?